The desert had a silence that pressed against men's chests like a weight. It wasn't the kind of silence one found in forests or in the quiet of midnight towns. This was heavier, filled with heat and dust and the promise that somewhere beyond the horizon, danger was gathering. The American camp sat in the middle of that silence, like a lone ship on an endless ocean of sand. The sun burned overhead, unforgiving, and the air shimmered with the rising heat waves that made even the most seasoned soldiers restless. For weeks, intelligence reports had painted a grim picture. The insurgents were no longer the scattered cells of desperate men they had once faced. They were becoming something different, something more organized, more daring, and far more dangerous. Scouts had seen convoys moving through mountain passes at night, armed trucks blending into civilian traffic, and leaders who carried themselves with an air of discipline the Americans hadn't expected. Every patrol returned with the same stories. The enemy was changing. The colonel had read the reports with a grim frown. He was a man whose eyes had seen more than most could bear. Decades of battle had carved deep lines across his face, each one a reminder that war had no patience for softness. He knew the rhythm of battle, how insurgencies rose, adapted, and fell. Yet this time, something gnawed at him. He sensed the shift long before his men did. These fighters weren't merely resisting. They were preparing to overwhelm. In the camp, unease spread like smoke. Soldiers moved with their rifles always close, even during meals. Conversations, once filled with laughter and banter, now slipped into silence whenever news of another ambush came in. The younger men, still adjusting to the desert, glanced often at the horizon as if expecting death to arrive in a dust storm. The veterans, who knew the taste of battle, kept their words few and their weapons ready. They could feel it too, that slow tightening, as though the desert itself was holding its breath. Then came the ambushes. At first, they were small. A roadside bomb here, a sniper shot from the hills there. But soon, the attacks became coordinated. An entire patrol disappeared one night, swallowed in an explosion that lit the horizon. Another convoy limped back to base with half its trucks burning, soldiers' eyes wide and faces blackened by smoke. The insurgents were no longer testing their strength. They were demonstrating it. Each report landed on the colonel's desk like a stone in water, rippling through his thoughts. He gathered his officers and laid out the truth. "We are not fighting ghosts anymore," he said, his voice low and steady. "We are fighting an army that has learned, adapted, and prepared. Do not underestimate them." His officers nodded, but behind their eyes was the same worry that stalked his own. The fight ahead would not be one of scattered gunfire and chance skirmishes. It would be survival against a storm. The colonel walked the camp often, his boots crunching in the sand. As he stopped to watch the men, he saw the nervous energy in their movements, the way they gripped their rifles tighter, the way their eyes darted toward the ridgelines whenever a shadow moved. He knew that fear could destroy an army faster than bullets. And yet, he also knew that truth, spoken plainly, could be a weapon. So he told them what needed to be said. "One shot won't stop them," he warned during an evening gathering. The men sat around him, weary from patrols, sweat streaking down their dirt-caked faces. The words landed heavy. He wasn't speaking of rifles alone. He was speaking of willpower, of an enemy that would not break with a single blow. The insurgents would keep coming until someone ended not just their bodies, but their leadership, their organization, their will to fight. His men shifted uncomfortably, but they understood. This war wasn't about luck or bravery. It was about precision, persistence, and cold determination. The days that followed only sharpened that truth. Scouts reported seeing enemy leaders in the villages, standing boldly among civilians, issuing orders in broad daylight. Convoys of armed men disappeared into caves, before American drones could strike. Every time the Americans thought they had cornered them, the insurgents slipped away, regrouped, and struck from another direction. Tension grew in the camp. The cooks served meals that few touched, the mess hall filled with silence instead of chatter. Letters from home went unanswered, tucked away in pockets. Even the medics worked with a grim pace, as though knowing more wounded would soon arrive. The desert heat pressed down like a hammer, making tempers short and nights sleepless. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, a squad returned battered and bloody. Their Humvee was shredded with holes, its metal twisted from an explosion. They carried 2 bodies in ponchos, laid them down gently, and said nothing. The colonel stood nearby, his jaw tight. He didn't weep, didn't curse, but his silence was heavier than any words. The men saw it, and they knew this wasn't just another fight. Something larger was unfolding, something that would test them all. Rumors spread quickly through the campfires at night. Some said the insurgents had foreign backing, that they were being trained by unseen hands. Others whispered that the enemy had grown fearless, willing to die in waves until the Americans broke. Every man had a theory, but none could ignore the reality. The insurgents were getting stronger, and the Americans were being hunted. The colonel called another meeting. His officers sat in a circle, maps spread across a table. Candlelight flickered against their faces as he outlined what they faced. "They want us to break," he said. "They want us to believe that no matter how many we kill, more will rise. And maybe that's true, but they have leaders' men who think they're untouchable. Cut the head, and the body falls." The officers listened, their eyes narrowing as the plan took shape. It wouldn't be enough to fight skirmishes, to push back against the tide. They would need precision, silence, and skill beyond the ordinary. The colonel already knew who he would call. Somewhere, out there in the dust and heat, a sniper team waited, men who had turned patience into a weapon, men who could end battles without ever being seen. But that was for later. For now, the colonel's men had to hold the line, to keep breathing in the desert heat while the enemy sharpened its blade. Every morning brought fresh tension. Every night carried whispers of what might come next. The threat loomed larger with each passing day, like a storm building at the edge of the horizon. The rising threat was no longer just rumor. It was real, it was organized, and it was moving closer. And in the middle of that shifting desert, the colonel stood unflinching, his warning etched into the minds of every soldier. One shot won't stop them. The briefing tent was dim, its canvas walls shifting slightly in the desert wind. A single lantern hung from the center pole, casting shadows that stretched across the faces of the gathered men. Dust clung to their uniforms, sweat carved thin, trails down their necks, and their eyes, tired but alert, followed every move of the man who stood at the front. The colonel wasn't a man who raised his voice unnecessarily. When he spoke, he did so with the weight of experience, and that was enough to silence even the most restless soldier. He looked over the room, his gaze sharp and deliberate, lingering on each man for a heartbeat before moving on. They weren't boys anymore, though some of them had been when they first arrived. The desert had aged them, stripped away the illusions of glory, and left only the reality of survival. The colonel knew that reality better than anyone. He carried it in the scars beneath his uniform, in the set of his jaw, in the calm he wore like armor. Finally, he spoke. His voice was steady, low, and without theatrics. One shot won't stop them. The words hung in the air like smoke. Soldiers shifted in their seats. Some frowned, others clenched their jaws. A few, younger and less seasoned, looked confused, as if they'd missed some hidden meaning. But the veterans understood immediately. It wasn't just about bullets. It was about the enemy's will, a kind of will that didn't collapse when one man fell, or when a single Squad was lost. These insurgents weren't scattering like frightened villagers. They were adapting, regrouping, growing bolder with every fight. The colonel walked slowly across the front of the room, his boots heavy against the wooden planks of the floor. "They are not the enemy you met when you first landed here," he continued. "They've studied us. They've learned our movements, our tactics, our habits, and they've learned to endure. You think one sniper shot, one drone strike, one patrol will stop them? It won't. They'll bury their dead, they'll swear revenge, and they'll be back by nightfall." A murmur rippled through the room. The younger men, those who still clung to the belief that their superior firepower would be enough, exchanged uneasy glances. The veterans leaned forward, absorbing every word. They knew the colonel wasn't exaggerating. They had seen insurgents fight on with half their squad dead, had watched them crawl bleeding through dust just to fire one last shot. This was a different kind of war. The colonel stopped and placed both hands on the map laid out across the table. The paper was stained, edges curling from use, dotted with marks that mapped ambushes, attacks, and suspected enemy routes. He tapped his finger on a cluster of villages circled in red. These are not just fighters. These are leaders, organizers. They think they are untouchable because they hide among civilians, because they move under cover of darkness. But they are the spine of this resistance. Break them, and you weaken the whole. A captain sitting near the front raised his hand slightly. "Sir, are you saying we target them directly? That we bypass the foot soldiers?" The colonel nodded once. "Exactly. We've been playing their game, reacting to roadside bombs, chasing shadows in the hills. It's cost us men, vehicles, morale. No more. We stopped chasing. We cut out the heart." The tent was silent. The colonel straightened, his expression unreadable. "But understand this, when we go after them, they won't break easy. You'll see men keep fighting with wounds that would drop anyone else. You'll see them charge, even as their comrades fall. You'll think one shot is enough. It won't be." He paused, letting the words settle, watching as each man wrestled with the weight of them. "This will take precision," he added, softer. "Now, but no less firm. Patience, discipline. And when the time comes, it will take more than a single trigger pull. You'll have to be relentless. If you hesitate, even for a second, they'll take advantage. And we will pay in blood." The soldiers shifted again. But this time, it wasn't with doubt. It was with understanding. The colonel had a way of cutting through illusions, of stripping war down to its raw truth. He didn't promise them easy victories. He didn't pretend the fight ahead would be quick. He told them what they needed to hear, not what they wanted. One sergeant leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He had been in firefights where insurgents seemed to rise again after being hit, driven not by orders, but by something deeper: faith, vengeance, survival. He nodded slightly to himself. The colonel was right. One shot wouldn't stop them. It never had. Outside, the desert night thickened. The wind picked up, rattling the canvas walls, carrying with it the faint sound of distant gunfire. The men glanced toward the noise, but the colonel didn't flinch. He had heard it all before. He returned to the map, his finger tracing along the ridgelines where scouts reported movement. "We'll need specialists," he said finally. His tone changed, less like a lecture and more like the first line of a plan. "Men who can reach where we can't, strike without warning, and disappear before the enemy knows what happened. We'll need eyes sharper than hawks and hands steadier than stone. I've already sent for them." The room stirred again. They all knew what he meant: snipers, ghosts of the battlefield, men who could bring silence and death with a single breath. The colonel looked up from the map, his gaze hard. "When they arrive, you will give them what they need: protection, support, information. They are not here for glory. They are here to make sure you live to see the end of this. He stepped back, folding his arms. Remember my words. One shot won't stop them, but 7, timed right, in the space of seconds. He let the sentence hang unfinished. He didn't need to say the rest. The men could imagine it well enough. The lantern flickered as the wind whistled through the seams of the tent. The colonel's warning had shifted something in the room. The younger soldiers sat straighter, the veterans exchanged grim nods, and the officers leaned closer to the map, already thinking of how to support the operation to come. The colonel gave a final glance around the room, satisfied. "Get rest," he ordered. "Tomorrow we prepare." The soldiers filed out into the desert night, the stars stretching endlessly above them. Some whispered quietly, repeating his words like a mantra. Others walked in silence, lost in thought. The colonel remained behind for a moment, his hands resting on the table, eyes fixed on the map. He had seen enough wars to know this would be no ordinary fight. But he also knew the truth. Men needed clarity, and clarity was what he had given them. As the last soldier disappeared into the darkness, the colonel straightened, extinguished the lantern, and stepped into the night. The desert air was cool now, the horizon black and endless. Somewhere out there, the enemy was preparing too, confident in their numbers, in their will to fight. The colonel's lips tightened. Let them prepare. Soon, the ghosts would arrive. The convoy came in just after dawn, kicking up a plume of dust that hung in the air like smoke. Soldiers in the camp looked up from their morning routines cleaning rifles, wolfing down rations, tightening straps on their body armor as the vehicles rolled through the gates. They weren't armored Humvees or supply trucks, just a pair of nondescript transports, their paint faded by the sun, windows darkened with dust. But the men watching knew immediately. These weren't ordinary reinforcements. From the first truck stepped 3 figures, and the atmosphere of the camp shifted instantly. They didn't move with the heavy swagger of infantrymen, nor the loud confidence of fresh recruits. They moved quietly, deliberately, like men who carried their own gravity. 2 of them had long rectangular cases slung over their shoulders, the unmistakable outline of rifles carefully cradled. The third, slightly older, carried a smaller pack, but walked with the calm of a man who saw everything and forgot nothing. The sniper team had arrived. The colonel was already waiting near the command post, arms crossed, eyes narrowing slightly as he studied them. He had seen countless units cycle through his command squads full of bravado, artillery crews with booming confidence, engineers buzzing with nervous energy. But these 3 were different. They didn't announce themselves, didn't salute sharply, or shout, "Sir," like others might. They simply nodded, acknowledging him, then stood quietly in the shade of the transport as if blending into the desert itself. The first sniper was tall and lean, his face partially hidden behind a faded scarf, his eyes sharp and unreadable. His movements carried no wasted energy. Even the way he adjusted the strap on his rifle case seemed efficient. Beside him, the second shooter was broader, his jaw set, a quiet steadiness in the way he scanned the camp. The third, the spotter, had a calmness that set him apart. His gaze lingered on the ridgelines, the towers, the shifting patterns of soldiers moving about. He wasn't just looking, he was measuring, calculating, committing every detail to memory. The colonel stepped forward. "You've had a long ride," he said simply. His voice was flat, but beneath it lay respect. These men didn't need fanfare, they needed acknowledgement. The tall sniper gave a small nod. "We're here to work," he said, his tone clipped, professional. His voice carried none of the bravado common among younger soldiers. It was the voice of someone who had spent years in the field, where survival depended not on talk, but on silence and precision. Word spread quickly through the camp. Soldiers gathered near the edges, whispering as they watched the trio move through the compound. Snipers had a reputation part myth, part reality. To some, they were ghosts who could kill from a mile away without ever being seen. To others, they were unnerving, men who walked among comrades, but seemed never entirely present. Their legend made them both respected and slightly feared. At the mess hall, soldiers paused mid-bite, eyes following the team as they entered quietly, collected simple rations, and sat apart. They ate in silence, speaking only in low tones to each other, their focus seemingly elsewhere. The younger troops exchanged glances. These weren't the kind of men you asked about home or girlfriends or football games. These were men who lived in a different rhythm, tuned to a different frequency of war. Later, the colonel brought them into the briefing tent. The map still lay stretched across the table, dotted with red marks where ambushes had taken place, blue arrows where patrols had been cut off. The colonel didn't waste time with introductions. He pointed at the villages circled in red, at the ridgelines where scouts had spotted enemy leaders. They think they're untouchable, he said. They hide among civilians. They move fast. They spread out so we can't corner them. But they make one mistake. They believe distance protects them. That's where you come in. The spotter leaned over the map, his finger tracing along a ridge overlooking one of the villages. High ground here, he said softly. His voice was calm, precise, as though every word was weighed before leaving his lips. Good cover, winds predictable at dawn. Clear line of sight to the central square. The taller sniper nodded. Once, we'll take it. The colonel studied them for a moment. He didn't need to lecture them, didn't need to repeat his warning. These men already lived by it. They knew one shot wasn't enough. They knew patience, coordination, and timing mattered more than anything else. That evening, as the camp settled into its uneasy rhythm, the sniper team prepared their gear. They worked methodically, checking rifles, cleaning optics, calibrating ranges. Every movement was practiced, ritualistic. They handled their weapons, not like tools, but like extensions of their bodies. The younger soldiers drifted nearby, pretending not to stare, fascinated by the quiet efficiency. One private finally mustered the courage to ask, "So, how far can you hit?" The broader sniper glanced up briefly, then returned to adjusting his scope. "Far enough," he said. "Nothing more." The private nodded quickly and walked away, both disappointed and strangely satisfied. The mystery was part of what made them legends. Night fell, and the desert grew colder. While most soldiers wrapped themselves in blankets and sought sleep, the snipers remained awake, lying quietly on their bunks, eyes open. They weren't restless. They were waiting. For men like them, patience wasn't a burden. It was a weapon. The colonel walked the camp one last time before turning in. As he passed their quarters, he paused, watching the faint glow of a lamp illuminating their meticulous preparations. He felt a rare sense of reassurance. These men carried an aura, unlike any other. They didn't boast, didn't seek comfort. They simply existed, quiet and ready, like loaded rifles waiting for a trigger. The colonel's warning still echoed in the minds of his soldiers. One shot won't stop them. But now, with the arrival of the sniper team, there was an unspoken sense that when the time came, there would be more than one shot. There would be 7. There would be 22 seconds that would rewrite the battlefield. The desert night stretched on, stars cold and distant above. Somewhere in the black horizon, enemy leaders slept, unaware that ghosts had arrived. The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of ochre and gold beneath a sky bleached pale by the sun. From a distance, nothing seemed alive, just sand, rock, and the shimmer of heat. Yet hidden within that barren landscape, danger moved quietly, gathering strength. It was into this silence that the sniper team crept, 3 shadows vanishing into the folds of stone and dust, carrying with them the weight of a mission that could change everything. They had left camp long before dawn, their transport dropping them off miles from their intended position. From there, it was all silence and careful movement. Boots sank lightly into sand, rifles strapped to their backs, every step calculated to leave no trace. The spotter led the way, his eyes scanning ridgelines, his mind already charting distances, angles, escape routes. Behind him, the 2 snipers moved like hunters, their bodies low, their breathing steady. By the time the first glow of sunlight touched the horizon, they had reached the base of a jagged ridge overlooking a cluster of villages. The insurgents had grown bold here, meeting openly in courtyards, barking orders to groups of fighters who moved like disciplined squads. The Americans had watched them for weeks, but the distance made them untouchable. Until now, the climb was brutal. Rocks crumbled underfoot, threatening to give away their position with each shift. The sun grew hotter, the thin air scraping their lungs. But the team moved with patience, born of years in the field. A climb that might have taken less disciplined men an hour stretched into 3. Every movement deliberate, every pause spent listening for the crunch of distant boots or the metallic click of weapons below. At last, they reached the ridge. From here, the land unfurled before them. A sweeping view of the villages, the dirt roads winding like veins through the desert, the clusters of fighters gathering in shaded courtyards. Through the scopes, everything became sharper, clearer. The insurgent leaders stood out easily, their posture confident, their movements commanding. They believed distance and numbers made them safe. The spotter settled into place first, unfolding his scope, adjusting the tripod until it locked perfectly. He lay flat against the rock, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the field below. Every detail mattered. The way flags shifted in the wind, the shimmer of heat that could warp a shot, the angle of the sun that might betray a glint off the scope's glass. He murmured numbers under his breath, marking ranges, memorizing wind patterns. His voice was calm, measured, like a teacher reciting facts to students. The tall sniper lay beside him, sliding his rifle into position. He moved with ritualistic care, extending the bipod, locking the stock into his shoulder, pressing his cheek against the comb of the rifle. He adjusted the scope with tiny, precise turns, his finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. Beside him, the broader sniper mirrored the motions, his weapon angled slightly to cover a different field of fire. Together, they became extensions of the ridge itself, unseen, immovable, patient. Hours passed. The desert was merciless, the sun climbing high, baking the rocks until they burned against bare skin. Sweat stung their eyes, trickled down their spines, pooled beneath their gear. Flies buzzed lazily, drawn to the salt, yet none of them moved. Patience was the foundation of their craft. They had waited in forests, in mountains, in ruined cities, sometimes for days, for a single chance. This was no different. Below, the insurgents gathered. Trucks rolled in, dust clouds announcing their arrival. Men spilled from the backs, armed and restless, crowding into the square. At the center stood their leaders, shouting orders, pointing at maps spread across wooden crates. The air was filled with their voices, with the clatter of rifles, with the reckless confidence of men who believed they were beyond reach. Through the spotter's lens, every detail sharpened, the glint of awe. A wristwatch, the sweat-staining collars, the way one leader gestured sharply with his left hand as he spoke. He relayed the data quietly. 200 meters. Wind steady, east to west, 1 knot. Adjust half a click right. The tall sniper adjusted, without hesitation. His breathing slowed, the world narrowing to a single point in his scope. He wasn't thinking of the camp or of the colonel's warning, or of the men who would depend on this shot. All that mattered was the crosshair, the target, and the rhythm of his own heartbeat. Beside him, the broader sniper prepared as well. His field of fire covered the flanks, ensuring no leader could slip away unnoticed. He exhaled slowly, fingers relaxed, eyes unblinking. The spotter whispered again, "Patience, not yet." And so they waited. The insurgents continued their meeting, oblivious. Cigarettes were lit. Water bottles passed around. The leaders leaned over their maps, pointing, arguing, planning attacks that would cost American lives in the days to come. The sniper team remained silent, their bodies pressed against the rock, their breathing synchronized. Time became meaningless minutes stretched into hours, the sun sinking slowly toward the horizon. Shadows lengthened across the desert floor. Finally, as evening approached, movement below caught the spotter's eye. One of the leaders stepped forward, raising his arm to direct his men. The gesture was sharp, commanding, the kind of motion that marked him as someone the others obeyed without question. The spotter's voice dropped to a whisper. "Target 1. Left side, 200 meters. Clear shot." The tall sniper inhaled, let the air out slowly, and settled the crosshairs. He waited, heart slowing, finger tightening just enough to feel the trigger's resistance. The spotter raised his hand slightly, a silent signal. Not yet. The second leader stepped forward now, joining the first, their gestures animated, their voices rising. The spotter's voice came again. "Target 2. Standing, 210 meters. Clear." The broader sniper's rifle shifted, the crosshair locking onto the second man. His body stilled, the world narrowing to the figure in his sights. The ridge was silent. The desert seemed to hold its breath. The spotter exhaled softly, lowering his hand. "Stand by," he murmured. The shooters didn't move, didn't speak. They waited. Timing was everything. Precision wasn't only about the bullet, it was about the moment. One wrong second, and the insurgents would scatter. One rushed shot, and the advantage would vanish. And so the setup continued. The sniper team coiled like a spring, waiting for the perfect instant to strike. Far below, the insurgents had no idea that death was already watching, patient and merciless, perched high above them on a ridge of stone. The stage was set. The ridge was quiet, except for the faint sound of the wind brushing over stone. Hours had passed since the sniper team first settled into their position. The sun had dropped lower, staining the desert with shades of red and gold, then finally slipping into dusk. Shadows stretched long and sharp across the valley floor, wrapping the insurgent stronghold in a cloak of deepening darkness. The insurgents remained below, gathered in the village square, unaware of the eyes locked upon them. Trucks idled on, the edges, headlights casting weak beams against mud walls. Men moved about with rifles slung casually over their shoulders, laughing, smoking, shouting. But at the center of it all, their leaders stood in a loose circle, voices raised, hands gesturing emphatically over a map illuminated by lanterns. For the sniper team, it was the moment they had waited for. The spotter lay prone, elbows dug firmly into the rock, scope steady against the earth. His breathing was calm, his voice low as he fed numbers into the night. Wind steady, quartering from left to right, 2 knots. Range 230. Adjust half moa right. The tall sniper adjusted his scope silently, his hand moving with mechanical precision. His world narrowed to the crosshair, centered just below the chin of the insurgent commander standing on the left. He slowed his breathing, pressing his body deeper into the stone until he was immovable. The broader sniper mirrored his calm, his rifle sighted on another leader across the circle. Still, they waited. The spotter's hand was raised, his palm flat, signaling restraint. Timing was everything. A single rushed shot could scatter the leaders, send them diving into the safety of walls and shadows. But if they struck at the right moment when the men were exposed, distracted, unsuspecting, then chaos would ripple through the entire group. The spotter's eyes tracked every movement. One leader lifted his hand, pointing forcefully at the map. Another leaned closer, nodding, his rifle hanging loosely at his side. A third man pulled a cigarette from his pocket, lighting it with a match that briefly flared bright in the dark. Sparks fell onto the sand at his feet. The spotter whispered, "Target grouping confirmed. 3 in clear sight. Sequence possible. Hold steady." The shooters made no sound. Their bodies were statues carved into the rock. The colonel's words echoed in their minds. One shot won't stop them. And it was true. But one shot would begin it. One shot would break the silence. And in the seconds that followed, the outcome of weeks of fighting would be decided. The spotter's hand lowered slightly. He murmured, "Wait." An insurgent fighter walked between the leaders and the line of fire, adjusting his rifle strap. The snipers didn't twitch. They had learned long ago that impatience was death. A target today was nothing compared to the right target tomorrow. The fighter moved on, vanishing into the darkness. The spotter exhaled softly, the faintest cloud of breath visible in the cool air. Clear. The tall sniper felt his heartbeat slow, each thud echoing in his ears. He inhaled deeply, then let the air escape in a long, steady stream. His fingers slid onto the trigger, applying gentle pressure until he felt the wall of resistance. He did not squeeze further. Not yet. The broader sniper mirrored him, finger poised, body unmoving. His sights were locked on the second leader, the man with the cigarette now hanging from his lips. He adjusted a fraction to account for the slight sway of the man's body as he spoke animatedly. The spotter's voice came again, low and steady, almost a whisper of command. "Stand by, sequence fire." On my mark, the desert seemed to hold its breath. The world shrank to a narrow tunnel of vision, the crosshair, the target, the timing. Everything else, the heat, the dust, the fatigue fell away. The spotter's hand hovered. His eyes flicked between the targets, gauging the distance, the angles, the likelihood of success. The insurgent commander in the center raised his hand suddenly, stabbing a finger at the map with authority. His mouth opened as he barked an order. The men around him shifted, their attention focused on his words. The spotter's hand dropped. "Send it." The command was soft, but in the ears of the shooters, it was thunder. The tall sniper's fingers squeezed, the trigger breaking clean. The rifle barked, recoil shoving into his shoulder. The sound was sharp but brief, swallowed by the open air. Through the scope, he watched the leader's head snap back, body collapsing instantly into the dust. At the same moment, the broader sniper fired. His shot cracked through the night, striking the second leader square in the chest. The cigarette dropped from his lips as he staggered, eyes wide with shock before crumpling to the ground. The square erupted in chaos. Fighters shouted, rifles clattering as they scrambled for cover. Some dove behind vehicles, others dropped flat to the sand. The snipers did not move. "Target 3, the spotter whispered. The tall sniper adjusted, his scope swinging to the third leader who was frozen in shock, mouth open, staring at his fallen comrades. The sniper's breathing slowed again. His finger tightened, and another shot split the night. The man spun, blood misting the air, and fell hard to the ground. "Target 4. The broader sniper shifted, sighting another man scrambling toward cover, shouting orders desperately. The crosshair locked. The shot cracked. The man folded mid-stride, collapsing in a heap. The spotter's voice was calm, precise, unshaken by the chaos below. "Targets 5 and 6, both exposed. Sequence fire." The snipers answered with silence, their rifles doing the talking. 2 more shots in rapid succession. 2 more bodies hitting the dirt. The square dissolved into panic. Fighters screamed, some firing blindly into the night, bullets whizzing uselessly against rocks and walls. Trucks roared to life, tires spinning, headlights bouncing wildly. The command structure had been gutted in seconds, the men below left without direction, without leadership, without hope. The spotter whispered once more. Last one. Leader far right, moving, 240. The tall sniper tracked, him leading slightly as the man sprinted for cover. He exhaled slowly, finger tightening, and the rifle cracked. The leader stumbled, a crimson spray marking the dust, and then he fell motionless. The spotter's voice dropped into silence. The work was done. The sniper team remained still, rifles steady, eyes locked on the chaos below. In just 22 seconds, 7 leaders had been cut down. What the colonel had warned became reality. Not 1 shot, but 7, each executed with precision, each breaking the enemy's backbone. On the ridge, there was no celebration, no cheering, only silence, as if nothing had happened at all. The shooters lowered their rifles. The spotter closed his notebook, and together, they melted back into the shadows of the desert night. Far below, the insurgents screamed and scattered, their command shattered beyond repair. The signal had been given, and with it, the tide of war shifted. The sound of the 7th rifle crack still hung in the desert air when the last insurgent commander collapsed, his body skidding across the sand before going limp. The ridge returned to silence. To anyone watching from afar, it might have seemed like a single heartbeat stretched long across eternity, a blink in time that separated order from chaos. 22 seconds. That was all it had taken. The sniper team didn't need to speak to understand what had just happened. They could feel it, the weight of the moment, pressing into their bones. Years of training, endless drills, thousands of rounds fired on distant ranges had distilled into this instant, this perfect execution of violence and precision. It wasn't luck. It wasn't chance. It was craft, honed until it could be unleashed with mechanical certainty. Below, the village was unrecognizable from moments earlier. Where there had been calm, laughter, and authority, there was now only panic. Fighters screamed in terror as they realized what had happened. 7 leaders gone. 7 voices silenced in less time than it took to reload a rifle. The first shots had frozen them in place. The middle ones had broken their rhythm. But the 7th shattered what little courage remained. Men ran without direction, some diving into the beds of trucks, others sprinting for alleyways between mud-brick walls. A few fired back wildly, bullets snapping overhead, but never close enough to matter. The snipers did not flinch. They didn't need to fire again. The damage was already complete. The spotter's voice was calm, almost clinical. Sequence complete. 7 confirmed. No secondary targets necessary. He lowered his scope, sliding his pencil across the small notepad where he had been keeping. Tally, writing a single number, 22s. The tall sniper blinked once, his breathing steadying as he lifted his cheek from the rifle stock. His heart still beat slow, controlled, as though his body had learned to move in sync with the rhythm of his shots. He glanced sideways at his partner, who was already scanning for new threats, even though they both knew the enemy was finished. The broader sniper whispered, "They're broken." And broken they were. The once proud fighters below scattered like ants disturbed from their hill. Their unity dissolved without the glue of leadership. Trucks tore out of the square, wheels spinning, headlights cutting jagged paths through the dark. Some fighters clung to the sides, others chased after them desperately. It was no longer a fighting force, it was a mob in retreat. The colonel had been right. 1 shot won't stop them. But 7 shots? 7 had done more than stop them. 7 had erased them. At the forward operating base, the first reports crackled over the radio. Distant patrols, who had braced themselves for yet another ambush, were stunned into silence when word came through. Enemy leadership eliminated, targets neutralized, area destabilized. The colonel stood over the comms table, arms folded across his chest as he listened. His expression didn't change, but the men around him saw something flicker in his eyes. Satisfaction, pride, perhaps even relief. He had sent the sniper team for exactly this reason. Not just to kill, but to change the shape of the battlefield. And in 22 seconds, they had done it. One sergeant muttered in disbelief. 7 in under half a minute? Jesus. The colonel cut him off with a glance. You'll see soon enough. The fight just shifted. Back on the ridge, the sniper team held their positions. They knew better than to move immediately. Movement meant exposure, and exposure meant risk. Instead, they remained statues in the rock, rifles steady, watching the chaos unravel. Through the scope, the tall sniper saw one fighter crouched behind a crate, his hands trembling so violently he couldn't reload his rifle. Another sat in the dirt, staring blankly at the body of his fallen commander, rocking back and forth as though refusing to believe what his eyes showed him. The broader sniper whispered, "They'll scatter by dawn." The spotter nodded. No command, no coordination. They're finished here. It wasn't arrogance. It was simple truth. Armies lived and died by leadership. And in this war, where fighters rallied around the loudest voice or the strongest arm, removing those voices meant removing the fight itself. Minutes passed, the night thickening as stars emerged above the desert. Slowly, the village emptied. Trucks roared away into the distance, their headlights shrinking until they were swallowed by the horizon. Those who remained slipped into shadows, melting into the alleys, too broken to regroup. The once boisterous square, filled with commands and laughter just minutes earlier, now lay silent. 7 bodies remained in the dust. 7 men who had believed themselves untouchable, who had commanded with certainty, who had thought distance. And numbers would shield them from retribution. Now they were nothing but stillness under the desert sky. The sniper team finally moved. Slow, deliberate, practiced. Rifles were cleared, scopes covered, gear tucked away with the precision of AV. Men who had done this many times before. They spoke little, their communication reduced to nods and hand gestures. The spotter tore the small page from his notebook and folded it into his pocket. 7 marks. 1 time. 22 seconds. That paper would never leave his possession. As they crawled back from the ridge, the broader sniper whispered, "No one's going to believe it happened this fast." The spotter gave the faintest of smiles. They don't have to believe. The enemy does. That's all that matters. By the time the sniper team returned to base, the story was already spreading. Word traveled faster than trucks in the desert, carried on radios, whispers, and the adrenaline of soldiers desperate for good news. Men gathered in small circles, retelling it like myth. 7 heads, 22 seconds. The numbers became legend before the team even walked through the gate. The colonel watched them arrive, his face as unreadable as ever. The team saluted, and he returned it with a crisp nod. He didn't shower them with praise, didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. He knew the truth of what had happened out there. Instead, he said only, "You've changed the fight. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we plan the next move." And just like that, the snipers disappeared again, melting into the anonymity they preferred. No medals, no speeches, just ghosts, returning to the shadows, waiting for the next ridge, the next valley, the next 22 seconds that would change everything. But for the men who had heard the story, it was unforgettable. Around campfires and inside tents, the tale grew. Some swore they heard all 7 shots blend into one. Others claimed the team had been invisible, spirits sent by God himself. None of them cared about the exact truth. The fact that it had happened at all was enough. For the insurgents who survived, however, the truth was brutal and undeniable. They would carry it with them for the rest of the war. They had thought themselves unstoppable. But then the shots came, one after another, precise and merciless. And in the space of 22 seconds, they had learned the lesson carved into their memory with blood. The colonel was right. 1 shot won't stop them, but 7 will. The desert was quieter now, though the silence was different than before. It was no longer heavy with anticipation, nor stretched thin by tension. Instead, it was the silence of shock, of a force broken, of a battlefield that had been irrevocably altered in a single instant. Below the ridge, the insurgent fighters moved like scattered shadows, disoriented and leaderless. Trucks that had roared away earlier now slowed, tires crunching unevenly over sand and stone. Men clutched at rifles they didn't know how to use. Without orders, firing blindly, hoping to create chaos. But chaos without direction was nothing, just noise in the wind. From the ridge, the sniper team watched silently. They had completed their mission. The meticulous planning, the hours of waiting, the careful tracking of movement, all of it culminated in a few fleeting moments of precision that had shattered the enemy's backbone. And yet, the snipers made no move to celebrate. Their work wasn't about glory. It was about consequence, and the consequences were unfolding below them. The spotter leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose. "They won't regroup tonight," he said softly. His voice carried no triumph, only observation. He scanned the square one last time, noting the fighters stumbling toward safety, trying desperately to form some semblance of control. Commands. Gone. Their structures gone. The only thing left is panic. The tall sniper's eyes remained fixed on a man crawling across the sand, dragging his rifle, trying to rally 2 others. "Somebody will survive," he murmured. "But not enough to matter. Not enough to fight as a unit again." And he was right. Leadership had been obliterated. 7 men who had coordinated, directed, and inspired their fighters were now nothing but bodies on the desert floor. The ripple of their absence spread fast. Panic became contagious. Confusion overwhelmed instinct. Fear replaced confidence. The insurgents had been masters of coordination, but even the sharpest blades break when the hand that wields them is cut away. Back at the American camp, reports began streaming in over radio. Patrols who had been bracing for ambushes now moved. Cautiously, but with an unfamiliar optimism. Convoys reported little resistance, sometimes passing through villages that only hours before had been bristling with enemy fire. Soldiers who had been tense, anxious, haunted by the specter of surprise attack, began exchanging incredulous glances. "Command gone?" one soldier asked over the radio. "Confirmed," came the reply. "Leadership eliminated. Enemy disoriented. Hold positions until orders?" The word spread quickly, moving from squad to squad, tent to tent. It wasn't just information, it was morale. The kind of morale that makes men lift their heads, breathe deeper, and remember why they fight. The colonel received the updates. Quietly, he didn't clap anyone on the back. He didn't order celebrations or send men running to praise the snipers. Instead, he listened to the reports, eyes narrowed, taking in every detail. Then he nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly. The mission had gone as planned. The battlefield had shifted. And now, it was time to capitalize on it. At the sight of the strike, the silence was thick with aftermath. Fires burned in overturned trucks, sending tendrils of smoke into the evening sky. The desert air was heavy with the smell of cordite and blood, acrid and sharp. Soldiers moving cautiously through. The area noted the eerie stillness. Where there had been orders and confidence just an hour ago, now there was only emptiness. A sergeant crouched near the edge of the square, surveying the scene with a grim expression. 7 leaders, gone in under half a minute, he muttered. To his squad, I've never seen anything like it. Another shook his head. They're ghosts. That's all I can call them. Men who make war and disappear without a sound. The first sergeant's lips tightened. Ghosts with a purpose. Even the men not directly involved felt the change. Where panic had once been contagious among the enemy, hope began to spread among American forces. A small spark, a flicker, of belief that maybe, just maybe, the desert could be tamed. The sniper team, still perched on the ridge, finally allowed themselves to relax, though only slightly. They began to pack their gear with methodical precision. Rifles were disassembled and cleaned, scopes covered, tripods folded, and packs secured. Each movement was silent, deliberate. There was no rush. They did not celebrate. In their minds, the job wasn't over until they were safely back within the lines of their own camp. The spotter glanced down at the empty square below. They'll scatter completely by dawn, he said. The tall sniper nodded. Some may survive, but the network is broken. Orders are useless without leadership. They won't regroup in time for the next wave. The broader sniper gave a slight exhale, his gaze scanning the horizon. By sunrise, this place will be quiet, and quiet is our ally. It was true. In war, quiet often meant victory. Chaos meant vulnerability, and the snipers had engineered that quiet with surgical precision. Back at the command post, the colonel convened his officers. Maps were spread out, notes passed around. He pointed to the villages recently cleared, the ridges now secured. This is the opportunity we've been waiting for, he said. The enemy is fractured. Patrols will encounter little resistance. We push now, we consolidate. We make them pay for every day they've hunted us. The officers nodded, understanding the stakes. It wasn't enough that the leaders were gone. The American forces had to act to ensure the victory held. The battlefield had shifted in 22 seconds. Yes, but if they didn't capitalize on it, the insurgents could regroup elsewhere, and the advantage would be lost. Orders were sent out immediately. Squads mobilized, vehicles roared, and communications channels lit up with precise instructions. For the first time in weeks, the soldiers moved with confidence, not trepidation. The sniper team, already making their way back to camp, passed through these operations silently, unseen and unremarkable. They were not there to participate in the mop-up or the follow-up patrols. Their job had been to create the opening. Everything else was up to the others. Even as the night deepened, the impact of those 22 seconds resonated. Soldiers who had watched the operation unfold recounted it again and again. 7 heads, they whispered. 7 heads in under half a minute. They spoke in reverent tones, almost unable to believe the efficiency, the precision, the sheer audacity of it. The story spread not only as fact but as legend. Around campfires, inside tents, and in quiet corridors between the command post and barracks, the tale grew. Each retelling emphasized different elements, the patience of the snipers, the exact timing, the unflinching calm of the ridge. For the soldiers, it became more than a tactical victory. It was a lesson in discipline, in timing, and in the devastating impact of skill used without hesitation. And yet, amidst all the celebration, quiet reflection remained. The colonel himself did not speak of glory. He did not send the snipers accolades or medals. Instead, he reminded his men that war was ongoing. Victory in a single engagement was fleeting. The battlefield might have shifted, but the war was far from over. He addressed the officers once more. This is a turning point, yes, but it's fragile. The enemy will adapt. They will learn, just as we did. Be vigilant. Use this momentum. Do not assume anything lasts forever. What we did tonight matters because we acted with precision and patience. Remember that? The officers nodded, understanding that wisdom as well as skill had won this day. By dawn, the villages were empty, save for the few insurgents too frightened or injured to flee. American patrols moved in carefully, confirming the results. The streets, once loud with shouts and orders, were silent, strewn with signs of the battle that had taken place without a single conventional firefight. The sniper team had not only eliminated leadership, they had reshaped the battlefield in a way that conventional tactics could not have achieved. The aftermath was not just tactical, it was psychological. For the American forces, hope had been restored. For the insurgents, terror had taken root. 7 leaders in 22 seconds had sent a message louder than any artillery barrage or drone strike could. Precision, patience, and timing could dominate even the most chaotic battlefield. The colonel watched quietly from the command post as reports streamed in. Soldiers speaking of the calm of the ridges, the chaos in the villages, the orders that had no one to follow. He did not smile broadly, but there was a rare light in his eyes. He knew the snipers had not just removed targets, they had changed the way the enemy would think, act, and fear in the days to come. And in that moment, the desert itself seemed to hold its breath. Weeks had passed since the Ridge operation. The desert no longer carried the tense anticipation of insurgent attacks, nor the quiet unease of soldiers waiting for the next ambush. Instead, the camp buzzed with a cautious optimism. Patrols moved with confidence. Supply lines flowed with less fear. And the story of the sniper team, the 7 shots in 22 seconds, had become legend among the troops. Soldiers whispered it in tents, repeated it around fires, passed it along during briefings. 7 heads, they said, voices hushed with awe. 22 seconds. To some, it sounded like myth. To those who had watched it unfold, it was an unforgettable reality. The sniper team remained as enigmatic as ever. They did not seek recognition, medals, or fame. To them, the mission had been a calculation, an execution of skill honed over years. Glory was irrelevant. Precision, patience, and the consequences of a perfectly timed strike were all that mattered. The colonel observed them quietly during routine inspections. He saw the weight in their eyes, the same calm detachment they had shown on the ridge. He understood it. These men were not like conventional soldiers. They did not march with the herd, nor celebrate small victories. They were instruments of strategy, and strategy demanded discipline beyond human impulses. Yet even discipline could not erase the memory of what they had done. Each man carried it silently. Every shot, every body falling, every heartbeat stretched across the 22 seconds was etched in their minds. This was the cost of mastery. This was the burden of precision. The enemy had felt it most acutely. The insurgent networks fractured. Immediately after the strike, without their leaders, coordination dissolved. Patrols failed. Planned ambushes collapsed before they could even be executed. Rumors of the Ridge operation spread among the insurgents like wildfire, breeding fear and distrust. Men who had once moved with confidence now hesitated, doubted, or abandoned their posts entirely. Even months later, remnants of the enemy referred to the incident in hushed tones, almost as if invoking it aloud could summon the snipers back. The Ridge, the 7 shots, they murmured. It became more than a tactical loss. It became psychological warfare. The colonel recognized the broader impact immediately. He convened his officers one evening as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the desert. "What happened on that ridge isn't just a story," he said. "It's a lesson. Leadership is fragile. Discipline is fragile. And precision applied with patience changes the game." The officers nodded solemnly, understanding that the operation had not only removed key figures, but had shifted the entire strategic landscape. Control of the area, once tenuous, was now firmly in American hands. Supply routes flowed. Patrols succeeded. Morale soared. Yet the legacy of the sniper team was not only in victory. It was in the example they left behind. Soldiers watched them work, observed their patience, their meticulous planning, and their unwavering calm. Every movement was instructive. Every shot calculated. They became teachers without words, models of how skill, timing, and discipline could achieve what brute force alone never could. Younger soldiers began to emulate their methods during drills. Observation and calculation became priorities. Patience replaced impulsiveness. The camp, once dominated by noise and constant movement, began to feel the rhythm of controlled precision. And in quiet corners, older soldiers would remark that a single lesson from those snipers was worth more than months of traditional training. The colonel smiled quietly to himself, knowing the operational and psychological legacy was just as important as the immediate results. "They've done more than eliminate targets," he said privately to a trusted aide. "They've changed the way we fight." For the sniper team themselves, the ridge was already behind them. They returned to their routines, checking equipment, reviewing maps, tracking enemy movements from afar, and preparing for the next mission. They remained ghosts in the desert, moving unnoticed, working unseen, but their impact was everywhere. Every patrol that encountered less resistance, every convoy that reached its destination safely, every enemy who hesitated, the results of those 22 seconds were embedded in every action. They spoke little of it among themselves. Pride was measured in precision, not applause. Satisfaction was silent. But the bond between them deepened. Each had witnessed the other's calm under pressure, the seamless execution of a plan, the ability to remain unmoved while history itself unfolded below them. Mutual respect needed no words. In the camp, the story grew into legend. Veterans would tell newcomers, embellishing the timing, the speed, the skill. "They took 7 heads in 22 seconds," they would whisper. Eyes would widen, younger. Soldiers would nod in disbelief, and even hardened men would feel the chill of respect. Some would swear they could feel the presence of the snipers when walking the ridges themselves, a phantom reassurance that precision could dominate even chaos. The legend inspired not arrogance, but caution. It reminded soldiers of the value of patience, the necessity of discipline, and the power of measured action. In a war defined by unpredictability, it became a guiding example of what skill and timing could achieve. For the colonel, the legacy was both operational and moral. He knew the enemy would learn, adapt, and strike elsewhere. But he also knew that the psychological weight of the sniper operation would remain, shaping enemy behavior for months to come. Leadership was fragile. Fear was a tool. And discipline, when applied with precision, could ripple across entire battlefields. He visited the sniper team one evening, finding them quietly inspecting equipment. He didn't lecture. He didn't praise. Instead, he simply nodded. "What you did changed everything," he said. "Not just here, but in the way we fight. And the way they think. Never forget it." The men acknowledged him, their expressions unreadable. They didn't need thanks. Their satisfaction was in the result, in the knowledge that their patience and precision had altered the course of the conflict in ways few could imagine. Weeks turned into months, and the desert slowly returned to its rhythm. Enemy attacks became sporadic. Convoys moved with greater confidence. Soldiers whispered the legend of the ridge, and even when the sniper team was nowhere to be seen, their presence was felt. The ripple of those 22 seconds continued to echo. For the men who had fired those 7 shots, the memory would never fade. Every detail, the feel of the rifle, the patience required, the sight through the scope, the chaos below remained etched in their minds. It was a reminder that war was not won by numbers alone, but by preparation, skill, and the ability to act decisively when the moment demanded it. And for the enemy, the legacy was one of fear-fractured leadership, and the knowledge that precision could strike anywhere, anytime, without warning. They learned that day that distance did not guarantee safety, numbers did not guarantee victory, and confidence could be shattered in less time than it took to blink. In the end, the story of the sniper team became more than a mission. It became a lesson, a legend, and a testament to what human skill, discipline, and patience could achieve. 7 heads. 22 seconds. A single operation that changed the course of a battle, the mindset of soldiers, and the psychology of an enemy. The desert remained vast, harsh, and unforgiving. But in its silence, in its shadows, the legacy of that ridge endured. A lesson carved not in stone, but in memory, in respect, and in the understanding that in war, precision often mattered more than power, and timing could be the difference between chaos and control. The sniper team moved on, unseen but never forgotten, leaving behind a story that would be told and retold. A story of patience, of timing, and of the quiet, deadly efficiency that had reshaped the battlefield forever.